Hey guys, it's Courtney and I'm back here with another kit. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Brutus Monroe Inspiration Box, which is brand new to me. And you can see that it is sealed and I've been chomping at the bit to open this because I couldn't wait to see what's in it. But before we do that, we're going to look at the subscription details of the Inspiration Box. Keep in mind that other than the price, this is going to apply to many of the other subscriptions that Brutus Monroe actually has to offer. They have everything for every budget. You can receive a aqua pigment every month. They have tons of different options to choose from, and I will link that below if you are interested. So for the Inspiration Box, this kit is $34.99 per month. Now, there are sometimes that are left over that you can make a one-off purchase with, but they do, from what I can see, sell out pretty quickly. You can cancel your subscription at any time if it becomes something that you're no longer interested in or no longer in your budget. And one of the benefits of being a subscriber is that you receive 15% off all of your purchases with the exception of other subscription purchases. So any stamps, dies, anything that you purchase one off that's not a subscription, you will receive 15% off. So let's dig right in and see what comes in this month's kit. So this box looks small, but it is jam-packed. So we have an enamel pin, which I'm loving. I know that's really popular now. People are collecting hundreds of them. So you'll receive an enamel pin every single month. Next, we have some ribbon, and these are kind of like lacy. There's 3 different kinds in here. I know it's kind of hard to see on the package, but they're all ivory and white, and they're a bit lacy. Very pretty for Valentine's Day. Next, we have some embellishments, and there's all different shapes in here. We have some clear sequins, we have some roses, and there's little heart keys, and really a big variety in there. We also have some hearts here, and these are pink, white, and red, so you have a nice mix in there. Next, we have some doilies, and there is quite a few in here. I think there was 8 in here. So you get 2 of each, and you have kind of like this craft color, kind of like a tan color. You have a lighter pink, a dark pink, and 2 white. And like I said, you get 2 of each of these. Next, we have some die-cut chipboard, but it's thin chipboard, thin enough to use on a card. And I wanted to test these out against a card base just to see the size because it looked about an A2 size card and it fits perfectly. So look at that. All you'd have to do is add a sentiment to that and it's beautiful. So you get 2 of those in this kit. Next, we have some embossing powder. I believe this is embossing powder. It's not labeled, but of course we'll be testing it out. And this is kind of like a sparkly pink. I don't know whether you guys can see the sparkle, but it's a very bright pink and it does have some glitter in there, mixed in there too. Next, we have some pattern papers, and you get 2 of each of these as well. And I like these because they are cut to an A2 size card rather than having them 6x6 and you end up missing half of it. So, and you can see they're all black and white themed. We have 4 different patterns there. Next, we have an embossing folder. This one is by Doris with a pretty heart. Next, we have the card stack, and these are 2 pieces each, but they are half sheets. So you end up getting 1 full sheet of each. We have a pink there. It's kind of like a bubblegum pink. We have white. We have a light pink. We have a dark gray and a light gray. And then we have a piece of glitter cardstock as well. Really super shiny. And finally, we have the stamp set, which is a large stamp set. So it's a 6x8 stamp set, and it's adorable. I love this stamp set. It's all of these little critters in these bubble hearts or whatever, but there's lots of different sentiments, adorable images. I can't wait to color these. So let's dig right in and create 5 cards with this kit. Okay, so for the first card, you can see here that I have 2 pieces of the pattern paper, but that will change because I changed my mind in many of the cards that we're going to be creating today. So I'm going to take some R80 markers, and I know I'm not going to get a whole lot of contrast here, but I'm just coloring in little bits and pieces of the hearts. They all have different patterns. Some of them have stripes, some of them have polka dots and checkered patterns. So I'm just coloring in some random areas, and I'm just doing a little bit of shading with these three colors. Normally I would bring in a scarier dark color to get the contrast, but this paper is not necessarily meant for coloring. So I want to avoid or at least minimize the amount of bleeding that I get. So I'm only adding a teeny tiny bit of ink to this paper itself. So I went ahead and colored in most of, or I would say about 2/3 of the not flowers, they're hearts, because I was only going to use a piece of this pattern paper in my mind. That's what I was going to do. So before I changed my mind, I ended up trimming down this panel. Now, what I was going to do is I was going to kind of layer this or add this to another piece of the pattern paper, which is the one with the black hearts and white background. And as I'm looking at it, it just didn't look right because the other one had absolutely no color at all. So the more I looked at it, the more I decided I'm better off going with the whole panel colored. So I colored in that second piece that we initially cut off with the same color combinations again. And then once that's done, I'll just kind of piece these together. So I went ahead and layered these onto a piece of the lighter pink cardstock that comes in the kit, and I just pieced it together so that it looks like one solid piece. If you look carefully, you can see where I cut it, but we're going to cover that up with a sentiment. So I took another piece of that light pink cardstock and I went ahead and stamped out my sentiment, which I'm just using the XOXO, which is part of the stamp set from the kit. And I went ahead and stamped that out with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And then I'll cut this down into a strip that will go across the entire card panel, right over that area that I cut my pattern paper in half. So you're never going to know that's what I did. So I went ahead and adhered that to my card panel there, and also the card panel that's layered with that pink cardstock onto a piece of black cardstock that is cut just a little bit bigger than the panel and a little bit smaller than an A2 size card, and then adhered everything to my white card base. And finally finished off the card with a little bit of shimmer, and I added shimmer to every single one of these hearts with a shimmer pen, and this one is by Spectrum Noir. I have like 4 different brands and I just grab whatever. So that is card number 1. For card number 2, we are going to be doing a little bit of coloring, and of course you guys know me, so I'm going to bring out my Copics. First, I'm going to go ahead and stamp out my image, and this is being stamped onto a piece of Nina Solar white 80-pound cardstock, and this is cut down with a stitched rectangle die. I went ahead and stamped this out with blackout ink by Ink on 3, and I did stamp this twice. It is the first time I'm stamping it, and it's a pretty big image, so I wanted to make sure that I got a nice, clean, crisp impression. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of the coloring here, or else this video would be way, way, way too long. So I'm going to use some warm grays for the unicorn itself. So I'm going to go right in with my darkest color first. Whenever I work with grays, whether it be warm grays, cool grays, those are the only grays that I own. But if you use the neutral, or the N, whatever the N is, I think it stands for neutral, or toner grays, it's going to pretty much work the same way. They blend very nicely, so you're pretty safe going in with the darkest color first, as long as you are pretty comfortable as far as where your shadow should be. I switched over to some cool grays for the, is it a horn? Would it be considered a horn, a unicorn horn? Well, whatever it is, we're going to be using some cool grays, and I just added a tiny bit of shading between each one of the little sections with the C5, C3, and blended that out with the C1. Now for the unicorn's hair, I wanted this to be 2 different color pinks. So I'm not doing a whole lot of shading with these. I'm just going to be using two different colors, and I'm kind of just picking some random strands of hair to add a little bit of shading with that RV34, and then I'll blend that out with the RV32. And for the remaining strands of hair, I'm just going to switch over to a different combination using the RV17 as my darkest color. And again, I'm really not worried about my shading being perfect here. And then I will go ahead and blend that out with the RV14. Now for the hearts, I colored them all different color pinks, but I'm not going to show you all of this. I will show you how I did the shading. So I'm going to start with my lightest color first and kind of just map out my darkest areas. Now I'm going to add my shading to either side, but you can see that I left like a little slit there of no color. And this is just going to be where my highlight is. It doesn't need to be perfect because I'm going to go in with a white gel pen anyway, but that way my shading will be very dark around this highlight and it will really make it stand out. So then I'll go in with my darkest color, then blend that darkest color out with the two midtones, and then I'll go back to that lightest color and fill in everything, including that little highlight, because like I said, we're going to go in with a white gel pen anyway. So moving on to another one of the hearts here, and I'm pretty much doing the same thing. Now part of this heart is tucked behind another, so I'm just going to add my highlight to the other side, but I'm doing the same exact thing. It's just a different color combination. I did also add a little bit of a shadow where this one heart is tucked behind the other. That heart in front of it would cast a shadow on this one. So I did make sure I added a little bit of extra shading there as well. But doing the same thing, blending these out with my two midtones, and then I will move back to the lightest color to fill in everything, including that highlight. So once my coloring was done, you can probably see a big smear on the bottom portion of my card panel. This is not marker, this is nail polish. So for those of you who use nail polish, sometimes you might get streaks and you might not know where they're coming from. They're coming from your nails. So I just use a sand eraser to get that off my paper, and I just add a teeny tiny bit of pressure, a little bit at a time, just remove a little at a time. So I cleaned up some areas where I went out of the lines with a white gel pen, and then I'm going to go ahead and adhere this down to a piece of that light pink cardstock that we used for the card before this, and I'm just leaving a little bit of a border on all four sides. And then I will adhere this down to a piece of the glitter cardstock from the kit. And this is cut with I stamped my sentiment first with Doll Pink ink by Simon Says Stamp directly under that. And you can see that this is a little splotchy, but once it dries completely, it's dry to the touch immediately, but once it really seeps into the paper, it will even itself out. So some dye inks are like that. They're like a shadow ink. So just keep that in mind. Let it sit. You're probably going to get a totally different result in a minute or two. So now I'm adhering this down to the glitter cardstock cut with a stitched scalloped rectangle die, and then I'm adhering this to my card base. Now I put my Misty on top of this for a few minutes because the adhesive takes a little bit of time to dry on the specialty cardstock. I added some shimmer to every single one of the little hearts here, and then I'm adding glossy accents to all of them. A couple ways you can do this. You can add it all at one time like I'm doing, or you can add them to some of the hearts that aren't touching, let it dry, and then add it to the remaining hearts. I don't have time for that. I have time for that. I just don't have patience for that. So I added the glossy accents to every single one of them. I don't care if they're touching. And then I let this dry. Now it will look a little bit cloudy as it's wet, but as it dries, it'll become completely clear and you'll be able to see that shimmer that we added with that shimmer pen underneath it. Now, once it is completely dry, now I'm going to go back in and add my highlights with my gel pen, and this will go directly over that dried glossy accents. So that is it for card number 2. Moving on to the third card, this is super, super simple, white on white everything. I have a piece of white cardstock here, and I did trim a little bit off of the one side. I took about a ½ inch off. I think it was a ½ inch. And this is going to be a landscape card. I went ahead and centered that into the embossing folder and then ran that through my Gemini. And this is beautiful. You don't need to do anything. This is just pretty as is. And really, I didn't do much. So I went ahead and adhered this down to my card base. And then I have two small strips, and they are 1/4 of an inch wide for each one of that glitter cardstock. Now you can layer this onto a large piece of glitter cardstock, but I don't like to waste it. So I'm going to use as little as possible to still get the same effect. I added a little adhesive to my card base and then added those little strips of paper. That way I can move them around as needed if I needed to. And then I went ahead and stamped my sentiment. And I'm using silver pigment ink that I've probably had in my stash for 5 years. I wasn't even sure if this was going to work. And it really didn't. It really wasn't metallic-y anymore, but it did give off a little bit of a shimmer, and it's very subtle. That goes along with this card. So actually, I kind of like it. I finished off the card just by adding a little bit of the glitter Nouveau drops to just the heart. And this will closely match the glitter paper. And that's it. That's all I did to this card. That's it. Card number 3 done. Moving on to card number 4. I'm using one of these chipboard things. I don't even know what you call it, but I was going to do some ink blending, and I am doing some ink blending with the Ink on 3 Atelier inks, and this is the red, and I'll link it below because that's not the exact term. But as I was doing my ink blending, I had an idea. I can get a 2 for here. So I added a little Tombow Mono multi-glue to the back, smeared that around and let that dry. Now I'm going to add this to a white card panel, lining that up perfectly, and then I'm going to continue my ink blending. So my initial thought was just to change the color of this piece, but as I noticed, I'm also going to use this as a stencil. So I'm going to get 2 cards out of this. So I'm just going to use this one color of ink. You can use as many colors as you want, but I'm just sticking to the one color here, and I'm going to add ink to the entire thing, including the card panel that is underneath it. Once that's done, I can go ahead and remove that, and you can see that I have a nice border on my card panel itself. So again, going to have 2 cards here. So for this first one here, I'm just going to go ahead and stamp out my sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink right there in that white spot right there, and then just put this aside because at this point I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it. For this next one here, I'm going to use the XOXO sentiment again, and in order to get this straight, which I got it straight, it just wasn't centered. I'm going to use my T-square ruler just as a guide so that all of my XOs, because this is going to go across this entire little strip here, all of them are pretty much straight. And I'm just using this as a guide. You can certainly use a stamp positioner. I just love my acrylic blocks. So I'm stamping this with the same VersaFine ink. And once the stamping was done, I realized that they were straight. They were completely straight, but they were too much towards the bottom. I had too much space. So I kind of played around with what I needed to do with the remaining area that's kind of just left blank. So I brought out some of the ribbon that came in the set, and I was just going to ink blend that to make it match. But none of that looked right. It was too pretty. And this is kind of like a grungy look card. So it just wasn't working. So what I ultimately ended up doing is just taking one of the stamps from the stamp set. It's 3 little solid hearts. And I just stamped a couple of those on the top. It's still not centered, but maybe this will give the illusion to the recipient that it's at least somewhat centered. So I went ahead and adhered this permanently down to a piece of this charcoal gray cardstock, and this is cut to an A2 size card, and I just adhered that to an A2 size card base. And you want to make sure that you're putting adhesive everywhere. So I'm adding little tiny drops to the little hearts and the little scalloped areas just to make sure that this sticks down and it stays completely flat. And it's super easy to line up because it's the exact same size as an A2 size card. So that is it for that one. Moving back to the ink blended one here, I went ahead and trimmed just a tiny bit off of all 4 sides. That way I have a little bit of a border and it's not too plain. It's plain. But this was kind of like a extra bonus anyway. So I adhered this down to another piece of that charcoal gray cardstock, again, cut down to an A2 size card. And that way I have just a tiny bit of a border. And that is it for this little bonus card. So moving on to card number 5. I have a piece of white cardstock here, and I have another piece that is die cut with a circle die. I'm going to line them both in my MISTI. That way I'm using the one with the window just for placement reasons for my stamp, picking up my stamp and then removing that top panel, stamping this again twice with the Blackout ink by Ink on 3. This is Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And I went ahead and colored this. I totally skipped the coloring for this one because it's very similar to the other one. And like I said, our video would be about an hour and a half long. So once my coloring was done, I'm going to take a BG11 marker and I'm just going to go ahead and outline everything. And this was not planned in the beginning. Had it been planned, I would have done this first because you got to be very careful when you're going around reds and pinks, especially with such a light color, because it's so easy to drag that color out and end up in places that you don't want it to be. So I just extended this color out, and this looks terrible, but this is going to be a shaker card, so you're not going to see any of these scribbles anyway, but I am taking the panel just to line that up to make sure that I did color in enough of the BG11, and it is a little bit streaky, but again, I'm not too concerned with that because it's going to be a shaker and you're not going to notice the difference. So first I went ahead and added some white gel pen details to these little hearts here. And then I stamped out my sentiment with that same red ink, that Ink on 3 Atelier ink because it's still sitting on my desk. And I went ahead and stamped that to the bottom portion of my card panel that is die cut with the circle. Next, I went ahead and took my Tombow Mono Multi-Glue and I adhered a piece of acetate to the back of my little window here. And you do want to make sure that you let this dry for a few minutes, depending on the adhesive that you're using. If you're using a double-sided tape, obviously, you can continue to go right away. But I love my wet glue, so unfortunately, that comes with drying time. Went ahead and lined up the entire back with some Scotch foam tape. You can see that I have little tiny pieces off to the side. Keep those because you can put those in the corner. You want to make sure that you're getting your foam tape as close to that window as you possibly can without going over it. I went ahead and took some of the little heart embellishments that come in the kit, and you just want to make sure they're flat and you're not piling them up, or else once you add that top panel, they're not going to move around. So you just want to make sure you basically have just a single layer of them. Going ahead and removing the backing of my foam tape, and then carefully aligning this directly over my other panel and making sure that all of my little hearts inside are going to shake around. Now it looked a little plain, so I ended up taking a few more of those heart embellishments and just stuck those down around the sentiment. So we'll take another quick look at all 5, or actually 6 cards that we created with the Brutus Monroe inspiration box. As always, I will link everything below in the description box, along with the information on how to go about subscribing to this card kit. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today, and have a great day.